And we are all set to go. Shawn, I don't know if you'd like to give opening greetings before I do.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Damarius. Hi, everyone. Happy Black History Month. Happy to be here and to share this with you. So, Damarius and I are gonna talk you through the Picturing Black History, both the project overall and the book that we both had a part in putting together and bringing out into the world, which was really great.
Yes, I also like to extend my thanks to all the folks, the library that brought this together, to the folks, American Black Holocaust Museum. We are certainly in community with you in terms of trying to advance visibility around these narratives that are precious, valuable, and important. So I'm excited in this centennial year, Black History Month, to share this project. And with that, we can get started.
So I'm gonna at first give a just a little bit about Getty Images, what it is and what we are and what we do, and then I'll get into some of the efforts that we've made around Black history, and then get into the Picturing Black History project. So as was said at the beginning, I work for Getty Images. I'm a curator with Getty Images. I've been there for about 8 years now. I'm trained as an archivist. I worked at Condé Nast before, which is a big magazine publisher in New York. And I have a master's degree in library science. So I've spent a lot of years in libraries and archives. Getty is image licensing business. It's the largest in the world. And we are also a premier editorial agency that covers news, sports, and entertainment events. If you've seen a photo of the Winter Olympic Games over the last day or two, it's a very good chance it was taken by a Getty photographer. But we're also custodians of the world's largest privately owned commercial photo archive. And it's spread across four main storage facilities in London, Los Angeles, Paris, and outside of Pittsburgh. And collectively, we have about 135 million original photographs in these collections. As you can see from the photos, they're quite large and they seemingly are endless. And believe it or not, only about 1% of those collections have been digitized and are available. So this is an ongoing process of discovery and digitization. And we also work with about 4,000 contributors and archives and 30 image partners from around the world that also bring their own archival works and make them available through Getty's platform. Really quickly, as I said, I have I've spent a lot of my career in archives, and I think that they're quite special places. I think that, they're living, breathing, and organic, and they exist in a constant state of evolution and discovery. I think that archives are a gateway to history. They're a keeper of untold stories, repositories of evidence. And they have the power to not only bear witness and expose injustice, but also provide a corrective weight to historic bias. And I think that, a lot of the work that we do at Getty Images is about that. Now, I could spend hours dissecting and debating the phrase that history repeats itself, as I'm sure we all could. But I think a point that does exist beyond debate is that the collective benefits that are had when history is consistently examined and re-examined, because it's through the present that the past truly comes into focus. So the Picturing Black History project began in 2020, but Getty Images had already begun the process of mining its own archives and collections and partnering with others to bring less represented histories to light well before then. Given that we are in Black History Month, I want to call out a specific example of someone that we have worked with for a while, and that is the estate of Charles Teeny Harris, who is a photographer with the Pittsburgh Courier, who photographed daily life in Pittsburgh from the 1940s to the 1980s. If you're not familiar with Harris's life work, I strongly suggest seeking it out. It's truly wonderful and is a unique and multifaceted record of Black life and community in the 20th century. And we're really honored and to be able to represent it. You want to go to the next slide? There you go. And another project I wanted to talk about is the Black Chronicles. So in 2014, we began the Black Chronicles partnership with the Autograph Agency of London. And as you can see, it was a collection, 19th century portraits to radically shift the understanding of presence and identities of Black figures in Victoria, Britain. It's a story that really was not really known or history that hadn't been told. And the way it came about was during this research phase, we discovered this extraordinary collection of 19th century photographs. They were all on glass plate, and they were extremely fragile, but in incredible shape and still very clear and pin sharp. And most of them had not been seen. They had been boxed away as part of a much larger collection, and they hadn't been seen or even touched by human hands in over 100 years. And it was really an incredible discovery and bit of scholarship that came around it. And so there's a short clip here that talks about it, and you see one of the curators that was involved from Autograph speaks about what it meant, and you can see some of this actual archival material. So go ahead, Damarius. There's no sound for a bit, so you're not missing anything. It's when she starts talking in a minute, then there'll be sound.
I remember first walking into the archive and I was simply blown away by the sheer vastness of its collections and just imagining the kinds of exhibitions and books that could be birthed from its holding. When we collaborated on Black Chronicles, the core visual aspect of this project was really made possible through the collaboration with the Houghton Archive. So without the research here at the Houghton Archive, the project would not have been possible and would have not become the kind of path-breaking and critically acclaimed research initiative that Black Chronicles was. So the extraordinary findings and unearthings here at the Houghton Archive changed, in my view, the cultural history of photography fundamentally, because for the very first time, images, portraits, and incredible portraits, extraordinary photographs of Black figures photographed in 19th century Victorian Britain were made accessible to a wider public. These were images that had never been seen before by contemporary audiences. Most amazingly, the photographs are so exquisitely preserved within the archive. Their faces truly come alive when one started to scan those images and then print them as large-scale photographs for the Black Chronicles exhibitions. And I would argue that this body of work constitutes the most important visual finding within the cultural history of photography in this country. And these images included more than 50 glass plates that had not been seen in 125 years. Glass plates that just bring the faces and clothing and sentiments of these figures alive in a way that only the archive can.
Thanks, Damarius. I've seen that many times and it still gives me chills when I see it. I mean, it really drives home the power of archives. Um, so now we're going to turn our attention to the reason that we are here, which is the Picturing Black History project and book. So in 2020, as I mentioned, the year that saw the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and others, demonstrations and protests that followed, birth of the Black Lives Matter movement. That same year, Bob Ahern, who's the Getty Images Director of Archives, was put in touch with a member of the history department at Ohio State University. Getty's CEO, Craig Peters, is an OSU alum, and he facilitated the introduction. And there was no real remit other than let's see what is possible. Let's think about what we can do. And so Bob met with the team there, and slowly the idea behind Picturing Black History began to take shape. And the final premise for the project arose from a simple question, which was, what if Getty Images opened its visual archives to scholars, curators, or cultural commentators in support of their own independent research? They could produce short form essays on a range of topics for publication, and we know that every scholar needs to publish, while Getty could provide imagery for free, including never before seen photos in support of the articles. It's an elegant but impactful marriage of text and visuals with a special focus on lesser known events or figures. And of particular importance, the project had to be both purpose-driven and sustainable, which 6 years later it is proving to be. And the final sentence of the project's mission statement is picturing Black history is our collaborative effort to contribute to an ongoing public dialogue on the significance of Black history and Black life in the United States and throughout the globe. And I think that really says it. So the site got up and running pretty quickly once the idea kind of came together and everyone got on board. As you can see, it was sponsored by Origins, Current Events and Historical Perspective, which is one of OSU's history department programs. And they were connected and supportive of it. And they helped get the website up and running. And it started as a web project, is what it was. That was always the intention. So the site's first essay was about a group of mothers in Ohio who began in 1954 to march every single day, no matter the weather, for 2 years straight to get their children better access to education. More stories soon followed, and in 2021, the team at OSU began to turn a selection of the essays into lessons plans for teachers to use in the classroom. By 2022, the site was publishing 1 to 3 stories a month consistently. We were getting a pretty good core group of stories on the site. And it was at that point that I told Bob, I said, I think we could have a book on our hands here. There's enough content now. And so, with the team's blessing, I made a book proposal and I sent it off to Abrams Publishing in New York, who I had worked with on previous projects. And Abrams not only loved the idea, but they came back with an offer to publish 2 versions. So the trade edition that that you've seen today and that we're talking about, and there's also a children's edition which is in the process of being written right now, and that will be targeted towards middle school age students, which I think is really, really wonderful and was even better than we could have hoped or expected. You want to go to the next slide? There you go. So part of the contract with Abrams stipulated that 25% of the book had to be new essays and unseen material. So that meant digging in the archives. And that need for discovery gave the perfect opportunity to get the team together. Many of us had never even met sort of in person. The whole thing had been done virtually. And we, as a group, headed deep underground into the limestone cave about an hour outside of Pittsburgh, where the Bettman archive is stored. That's one of our archives. Um, and it's about a quarter mile underground, and it literally is carved into its Iron Mountain, and it's a limestone mountain. And the way it works is you basically tell them how much square footage you need for storage, and then they just start drilling into the mine, and they cut you a cave and a tunnel, and then you fill it up. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Damarius, who was one of the book's authors and an editorial lead, and I would love to hear from him, his experience in the mine, and then beyond that, his work on putting the book together.
Yes, well, thank you, Shawn, for arranging the kind of history of the project and context of the project. This is a very cold day in June. I think it's the coldest day in Pennsylvania. We were in that mine reviewing all the images that would become part of this book. So that was really special and rare opportunity to look at the scope of what Getty Images had available at the Bettman Archive, and to begin the conversation about the scope, the themes and topics of the book might cover, and the additional images that we wanted to furnish the book with, as we had some images and content that existed online that became part of the book. There was surplus content that was added as well. And so we began that conversation really in the archive, in dialogue. And some of my colleagues on the editorial team are viewable in these images. Paul McAllister is one of the contributors. Daniela Edmeyer is also an editor. Now Dr. Edmeyer, she's finished at Ohio State. And I'm the last one in our relay race, finish in our program there. But we really were a team that worked in close lockstep and deliberating about what images like. It's a really special opportunity to work. Also, in terms of image selection, we began with a general idea, and you'll see the table of contents. I'm talking a little bit about that, of some topics that we wanted to cover in terms of the contributions we had already established, some of the content areas that were really visible and high traction areas on the website. So we knew that there was interest among educators, among the general public, among students who primarily engage with the website in Ohio in terms of some of the content areas. And so when we went to identify images, we had some basic visibility about what topics we might want to explore. And then visiting this vast archive really had about a day in the archive with the archivists to deliberate about what images we might include. There were additional images that we would select after this process, but it really, this book began looking at some of the images which had not yet been digitized, and beginning those long and difficult conversations about what to include and why. So it was a really rare and special opportunity in some of those materials. Many of them glass plates. So one of the images, I don't believe it's in this presentation, but that Daniela had was holding the glass plates from the March on Washington. And so looking from the photographer's lens of that rare and special moment in African American history, a really exceptional part of this process. And we were really very grateful to begin this work in the archive for them. So I'll start with the cover of the book. So Miss Barbara Dumetz is a cover photographer. She's had a long career in commercial photography and was one of the pioneers in terms of Black women making advances in that area. In the cover images of two of her colleagues, she attended the Art Institute of California, and two of her colleagues are pictured on the cover. She shares a little bit about the composition of this image and why it's significant. So I will play a selection so you can hear her voice. There are captions on this video because unfortunately her audio is very low. So it will caption her as she speaks, I'm sure.
The American Boundary is the title because actually the title didn't come until great, many years after I traveled. And so I said, this is going to be my American Boundary, because he had on the jeans and she was sitting there staring at it. You know, it was more of a revolutionary state. But we're here, we're not going there. You know, you're doing stuff on that.
Yes, so this cover image really was an important contribution. This began as one of her assignments as artist to contribute to a canon of the American God, to think about in her time how African Americans might be represented. There's also a previous version of this by Gordon Parks, so she's, even in terms of the Black photography canon, imagining her contribution there. But this, both Barbara Dumetz, in terms of this image, what she explained, and her personal family history, was a really significant figure as a photographer. Her grandfather was an important photographer of the Black press in Pennsylvania, I believe at the Pittsburgh Courier. And so she comes out of a tradition of image making that is connected to Black activism and community affairs, and she becomes a photographer herself at Fisk University because of her own engagement with student activism in the late 60s as an undergraduate student. So her career is connected to the currents of Black lives. This image is a good representation of that, but also her personal biography in terms of her relationship to the community that birthed and shaped her as a young girl and into her professional career is also a reflection of what we hope to capture. So. And with that, I will talk about some of the themes of the book. This was a special area of focus for me. One of my primary responsibilities as one of the graduate students on this project was a student in the department as this project came together on the website and then in the book was to identify contributors. And I believe there are 35 contributors to the book. I have a short contribution as does Shawn. We'll talk about that shortly. But what we really wanted to think about was, in terms of Getty Images archive, what are the images that would really allow us to present a really dynamic and engaging representation of Black life across time, across geography, and across some of the issue areas or themes or topics in Black history that deserve to be better known in the classroom space, better known in terms of our contributors. They were really had certain passion and enthusiasm to write about certain topics in terms of kind of academic debates about areas that deserve to be better known and represented, academic literature. And so that guides the structure of the book and the themes of the book. And we really, in terms of the contributors, content experts, there were scholars and graduate students, but also librarians and other content experts who contributed their particular knowledge about these images to draft stories around what the images draw us into events, into community, into a dynamic, it's a snapshot of a dynamic continuum of life. And so the contents of the book, we hope, represent some of those major areas that become growth areas in terms of I will now allow Shawn to talk to us about his contribution.
Thanks. So, as we were putting the book together, I really was really interested in contributing and putting in writing something and I mean, I have access, of course, to the archive every day. And part of my job at Getty is I oversee the archive of a photographer called Slim Aarons. I've done a few books with him as an author. Here's my shameless plug for the latest Slim Aarons book, which I did with Abrams as well. So, but Slim Aarons had this incredible picture of another Slim Hyatt, who was a disc jockey in New York in the 1960s. And it's such an incredible picture. And so it just makes you want to know what the story is and what's happening. And because picturing Black history is, a big part of it is telling stories that aren't really well known or trying to shine a light on previously untold stories. I always wondered who this was. Who is this guy, And so I wanted to know more about him. And so I figured other people would too. So I sort of started to digging into it. And found out that he was a Panamanian who met up with an American serviceman named Peter Dushan, whose father was the famous band leader Eddie Dushan. And when Peter was stationed in Panama in the Canal Zone, in between, sort of right after the Second World War. And these two became friends and hit it off. And Slim Hyatt was really known around sort of the clubs and the jazz clubs. He was a musician, and he and Peter became friends. And ultimately, when Peter came back to New York, Slim joined along. And he went and he moved back to New York with Peter and started kind of working for Peter and living with Peter in New York. And around the same time, there was a Frenchman who started, named Olivier, whose nickname was the Disco Daddy, who came to New York from Paris, and he opened Le Club, which was the first sort of discotheque, the Parisian-style discotheque in New York. This is in 1960. And it was a former parking garage, an underground garage that they turned into a nightclub. And you had to join and become a member. And it was the idea of playing recorded music was not something that happened in the US or in New York. It was something that was kind of regularly happening in Paris at that time, but it really hadn't clicked in New York yet. And so Olivier was trying to find people that could kind of get the concept and figure it out. And he was doing some live musicians and some recorded musicians, but it never he was having a hard time. So he reached out to his friend, Peter Dushan, and said, "Hey, do you have anyone you think that could be into this idea and this concept?" And Peter said, "Yeah, it's my buddy Slim. He's your guy." And so he came, and now Slim had never played music for an audience before. He had no idea how it worked. He had some musical talent, but reports, there's a music historian described his first night at the nightclub as catastrophic, was the word that they used. But Slim Hyatt's his innate gift for finding the beat and recognizing pop trends and hyping up a crowd soon overcame his technical limitations. And he became sort of the heartbeat of what became the hottest club in town. So he was interviewed by the New York Daily News, 1964, And he said, before I knew what happened, I'm the disc heir. That's what DJs were known back then. I'm the disc heir for private affairs in Tuxedo Park, the West Side Tennis Club, and Lake Placid. They asked me to open discotheques in Montreal and Mamaroneck and Stamford. I'm booked for private parties through the 4th of July. So, of course, people were wanted to copy the formula, and other nightclubs and things opened up. So Hyatt was in pulled away and went to worked at other nightclubs for a while. And finally, he ended up in the basement of the Drake Hotel on Park Avenue. And they had opened up what was known as Shepherd's Nightclub, which is what you see here. Now, Shepherd's was named after a 19th century luxury hotel in Cairo, hence the Egyptian theme. And that hotel was built by a man named Samuel Shepherd, so which is why they called it Shepherd's Nightclub. So the actual DJ booth, they must have pulled out all this for the picture. It's a little staged. The actual DJ booth is, if you look behind Slim Hyatt, you see there's a kind of green wall with little slits. The actual DJ booth was behind that, and he would peer out through those little slits to kind of keep an eye on the crowd and see what was working and what was happening. But a typical night at the nightclub was you had to pay between $2 to $4 cover charge, depending on the night. There was seated dinner. You can see all the tables. And then around 10 p.m., they would clear some of the tables and clear the dance floor, and Slim would start his set. So he would play kind of slow and easy for the first hour or so, and then kind of the volume would come up, the tempo would pick up, and around 11 p.m., things would really get going. And he told Variety in a 1964 interview, he said that, table chatter was equal to death in a nightclub. He said they're going to have more fun if they're dancing, and if they start talking, I make the music louder. So, with Hyatt at the helm, fun typically lasted until 3 or 4 a.m. So by 1964, discotheque was and dance music and popular dance had spread across the U.S. Things like the waddle, the frug, the mashed potato, the Watusi, and of course the twist, which started at the New York Lounge, the Peppermint Lounge, was all kicking off around that time. And Hyatt was regularly shown and name checked in trend pieces from Women's Wear Daily, Variety, Look Magazine, the New York Times. They each spoke of his mastery and his skill at controlling the crowd. But Variety said, by judicious admixture of tunes and tempos geared to the tide and timing of the customers, he keeps the room vibrant and jumping. So, I mean, which is, pretty good description, I think. So ultimately, he created a whole business. He was setting up sound sets and sound systems for other nightclubs. He had a group of DJs that he trained that then went out that were all sort of working for him. And he was really a real entrepreneur. And then also in that same year, in 1964, he was hired to produce a record, which you can see it's in the bottom left of that picture in front of the statue there. And it was called Dance Discotheque. And he was the first DJ that was actually hired to produce a record. So Slim remained active in the New York club scene for decades. He had a long-running night at Double Supper Club in the Sherry Netherland Hotel from the 80s until he sort of retired in the mid 90s. And he and his wife lived in New York on the Upper West Side, had 2 daughters. And he's largely unknown today, but he had a really critical role in the development of New York's nightclub culture and the DJ scene, and I think he deserves much broader recognition.
Yes, and with that, I'd like to share a bit about my contribution. This is from another section about Black internationalism or the global connections of African American history, the histories and movements around the world. In the slides to come, I'll also talk about other significant themes of the book that you don't see in the table of contents, but were really intentional in terms of how the book was put together. So 2 images here are really significant. On the left, we have Thurgood Marshall, the first African American Supreme Court Justice, and Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of independent Kenya. This is an important image. This is taken in Kenya in 1963, whereas 1963 is the year that Kenya emerges as an independent nation. And the first thing that jumped out to me looking at this image is just the humor in it. Thurgood Marshall has many images that have been captured, reflected as part of his contribution and impact, and many of them he's very stoic. So the first thing is just, okay, what could be so amusing that's happening in Kenya? Obviously, he has close connections to Jomo Kenyatta. And I would later discover that Thurgood Marshall was intimately involved in drafting the inaugural constitution in Kenya. And so the initial constitutional conventions to form what would become the legal infrastructure for an independent African nation, Thurgood Marshall is intimately involved in that. And of course, that influence and significance operated in both directions. Thurgood Marshall would later be installed as a chief, and that would be really significant. Many of his close colleagues at NAACP and other lawyers that worked in close contact with him mentioned how he would regale them with tales of Kenya and his travels and cultural encounters in Kenya. And so this moment is really significant because it reflects the intimacy of these two men, but also the intimacy of these two histories. And so it's a way of thinking about independent African nation building, the emergence of African nations across the 1960s, starting in the year of Africa in 1960, which I'll talk about shortly in the image on the right, but also in 1963 in particular in this image. And so that's a really common important representation of that. Thurgood Marshall is not alone in terms of African-American civil rights activists, lawyers, and attorneys that are intimately involved in the emergence of African nations, but this is a good representation of the significance of that moment, that exchange. And I was thinking about what emancipation and how a just society might look. It's also valuable and important to keep in mind that African-American activists are looking and thinking about what the possibilities of an independent African nation states means for a global emancipation and freedom and a liberation from oppression and repression, particularly in the United States. And so all of these different trends and contacts are really reflected in this image of congeniality between these two figures that are stand-ins for many communities of people who brought them to prominence and significance and sustained their memory in terms of being significant historical figures. So that was a really important image for drawing that out and representing that history. On the right, we have Malcolm X. Malcolm X is in Harlem. I believe this is in 1960. This is Babatunde Olatunji on the left. And on the right, we could not identify that figure, but I'm happy to share this at events where we can learn from folks who may be able to contribute and help us identify this figure on the right here. But we know that this is in Harlem. We know this is in 1960. We know that this is the 1960 was the year many 17 African nations established their independent nationhood, emerged as independent nation states. This is the day that Nigeria becomes an independent nation. It's actually captured in 1960. And so Babatunde Olatunji is really important. In New York, he's a drummer, cultural performing artist. He later there's a performing arts center that was established in his name in New York City. And actually John Coltrane, the saxophone player, his final performance was at the Olatunji Performing Arts Center in Harlem, New York. So there's connections there in terms of just the spectrum of cultural production and cultural workers, that there's an exchange in collaboration that is happening in New York, but that in this moment, what is captured is the emergence and the beginning of African independence and connecting the United States to that moment. So this is a really important, special image that reflects Malcolm X's centrality to that, and also the importance of cultural arts as part of that. In addition to that, this is one of my favorite contributions. This is an essay, Portraits of a Black daguerreotypist. This is about the photography business of J.P. Ball, James Presley Ball, Cincinnati, Ohio. He has a photography studio, which was very prominent. And these are three of the captures from his studio, which I think are really significant for revealing the intersection between image making and Black history as a tradition and the important significance of photographers as part of that tradition. He had the opportunity to photograph Frederick Douglass, of course, was widely photographed in the 19th century. And we see that there, also attesting to the prominence of his photography studio. And the Douglass thought it important to be photographed there, and that J.P. Ball had the opportunity to photograph Douglass. In the center, we have J.P. Ball's mother. And so what was also really important in James Presley Ball was to document his family history through technology of the photograph. But what he documents in his efforts to document his community is his genealogy, is his relationship to his mother, is the significance of his own bloodline. And so as significant as it was to document and preserve the memory of prominent political figures and activists in this photography studio, it was equally as important to J.P. Ball to document his own mother, his own bloodline, his own genealogy tradition. That is certainly an intimate part of what Black History Month as a tradition exists to do. And then on the far right, we have a Black child. And so this image certainly was styled by J.P. Ball, the child in the uniform, the composition of the image, the chair that the child is sitting on. And this was a really important part of this photographic record and reference for thinking about the future and envisioning the future, and that photography is an important tool for African-American image makers to think about the past and to document significant historical figures, to document their relationship to time and place and their community, their bloodline, relatives, community members, and also to imagine a vision of the future, and that in documenting this child positioned in this attire and in this way represented in this image, the composition of this image also conveys a view of African-American future. So that was a really important part of image making from the very beginning of Black photography as a practice. So this contribution was really important for image making. Another important element, Shawn has already spoken about the children's adaptation of this book that is forthcoming. But in terms of the image representation, the catalog that we wanted to include in this book, there are many images of Black children that are included in this book. Here are two examples of that. But we wanted to emphasize the importance of Black children as history makers. That as significant, as important as it is to think about laws, to think about the segregation of educational spaces and business and other formal and informal spaces that people gather, it's also important to think about who is doing much of that activity. And in many cases, it's Black children at the forefront of that integration of civil rights activity and on the front lines of a lot of that social political formation. And a lot of the community building around the civil rights movement really privileged preparing and equipping children to be prepared for a future that American society would live up to. So in these captures here, we see involvement of children in both types of action. On the left, you see promise and perseverance, which is the image an image on the left from the essay that Shawn has already talked about from Hillsborough, Ohio. And on the right, this is the Freedom Press Office. This is the children's adaptation of Mississippi Freedom Press, Mississippi Freedom Summer. And so this is a children's adaptation of that work, of that important documentary work, that as the adults were writing newsletters and circulating knowledge about what was happening on the ground in Mississippi and circulating that knowledge across the state and across the country through their press organs, so were the children also contributing their literary talents to documenting what they thought was significant and prominent and important. So this image really captures that Black children are part of the community making historically significant action. That is the last thing that I'd like to mention, certainly, Shawn, please add in additional comments, is that this project continues. And so there are contributor interviews. So many of the contributors to the book, many of the graduate students and myself and some of my colleagues have interviewed many of the contributors who are talking about why their essays are particularly significant to them personally, what they hope folks will take away from their essays, how they hope their essays might be adapted in the classroom. In terms of lesson plans, we also have lesson plans that are adapted to the state of Ohio. And so many of the contributors are talking about how educators might adapt their contributions to the classroom. And then there are additional resources. So there are interviews, there are photographers who have also contributed, many of our contributors, two come to mind at this stage that are contributors to the book, have interviews on the website, scan at the QR code to see more of that book-related content. But I also mentioned, Shawn, love to hear more, Shawn, about the ongoing work of the project, but that the book is a document a moment in time in November of 2024, but that the work of documenting these stories of uplifting Black history, making publicly accessible the images and getting images on that is ongoing work that preceded the book and that continues beyond the publication of the book. So I just want to mention that there are many things that we cannot contribute to the book and include in the book when that work is.
Yeah, I'll just mirror that, and this is an ongoing project. We just published a new story this week that just went on. So it is an ongoing project. It's still something happening. Getty is very committed to this, and we've been able to, like I said, it's becoming a self-sustaining thing, which is really wonderful. And we have other projects going on as well. A lot of these, we have something called the Black History and Culture Collection, which we make images available to cultural institutions for gratis, for free. And we started a grant program for historically black colleges and universities across the United States. So right now we have 11 schools that we're working with. And that takes money, gives them grants, and we work with Epson, who provides scanners and training. And we have students coming in and digitizing some of the collections. There's incredible collections in all of these HBCUs that don't get seen very often. So that material is now there's, I think, over 10,000 images that have come online available through Getty Images. And again, all the money that's made for the licensing of those materials goes right back into those colleges. So it's a great program as well. So there's a lot of things that are still happening and will continue to happen. So keep an eye on this space.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you so very much for your presentation and for the work you've done. I cannot emphasize how significant this collection, the work you've done, and then as we know, all the other great work folks do. And so it's really an honor and a privilege to be in conversation with you today and this evening. And thank you all for putting this together. I'll obviously be mindful of the time. And I also want to let you know I have a new computer, so I'm working through getting familiar with this thing. So bear with me if indeed it looks like I might have some faces there. I am indeed Robert Smith. I have the honor and privilege to serve as the resident historian at America's Black Holocaust Museum. I am also the Harry G. John Professor of History at Marquette University, and I direct our Center for Urban Research, Teaching, and Outreach. So much of what I do in connection with ABHM is connected to our outreach efforts that universities engage in. And that gives us the opportunity, as you all highlighted, in so many clear ways. It gives us the opportunity to engage students in the process of working with the museum. It gives us the opportunity to engage community members in really valuable ways. As docents, we refer to our docents as griots. It allows for local educators to be engaged with the museum, both those in K-12 classrooms and then also in universities and colleges around the area. And the virtual museum is significant because it does allow us to reach indeed a national and international audience. Dr. James Cameron, whose legacy we keep alive with both the virtual museum and the physical museum, is the last known survivor of a lynching in the United States. And he survives this iconic lynching that many of us know all too well. These two gentlemen, unfortunately, of course, lost their lives, friends of his. But Dr. Cameron, James Cameron, a young man, was the third individual who was intended to be lynched that day by what he thought was indeed divine intervention. His life was spared, and then he, of course, spends the rest of his life working for Black liberation and racial justice. And one of the ways in which he did so was to move to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This image is out of Marion, Indiana. He moves to Milwaukee, Wisconsin several decades later and opens America's Black Holocaust Museum. And it's not only his work as a griot himself at the museum that's central. He is in many respects a quintessential scholar activist. He leads the state NAACP in Indiana. He's engaged with other activists across the country. He's also a historian in his own right, in that he is writing books. One book in particular, his memoir, Time of Terror, chronicles his experience surviving the lynching. And then he goes on to write a number of pamphlets. We would call them zines or something today, but he writes a number of pamphlets that are historically rich, that are documented. As a historian, would document the histories, and those pamphlets then go on to tell the stories of local history in Milwaukee, and then also grapples with complicated topics like Reconstruction and Jim Crow and the United States Constitution and slavery in the United States. And so he's in so many ways both a scholar and an activist. And what we've done is we've preserved his history and his ideas here at the virtual museum, and then also in the physical museum. The museum opened in 1988, and then due to economic challenges that so many of our local cultural institutions face on an ongoing basis, but certainly faced in the late years of that first decade of the new millennium, the museum was forced to close because of those economic challenges. And then what happens is there's a core community of folks who work really, really hard to keep his legacy and his dream alive. And the museum reopens on February 25th, 2022. We had hoped to open in 2020, but then of course we know what happens at that point with the pandemic, and so we had to push it back. And so the virtual museum actually launches in 2012. So we had about 10 years where we were sharing information and engaging the public through the virtual museum as we were preparing to reopen the physical space. And when we say virtual museum, I want to make sure that it's clear that we, of course, tell the story of the museum. We welcome folks to learn about the museum and come visit. We share relevant and breaking news that are connected to the themes and ideas associated with the museum, events. We obviously want folks to contribute and take part in that way. But we also have a number of galleries that are written by scholars, that are written by graduate students, that are supported by the research of undergraduate research assistants as well. And so we make sure that the information we provide here at the museum, at the virtual museum, is of the highest academic standards and quality, because we want people to use the museum for research. We want the museum, the virtual museum in particular, to be a place where folks can very easily get very accurate information. And we know how challenging truth is, and the fact that truth is a negotiated terrain these days is deeply disturbing. But we want to make sure that when you come to our virtual museum and you look for this information, that you can rely on some very accurate, historically sound scholarship. And as a function of that process, we reopened in 2022. You can see some of the images here of the inside of the museum. It's also a place where we are welcoming community engagement, community events, and the like. And so it's not only that we have a virtual museum, it's also a physical museum that is very central to the community here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I want to make sure to spend some time here going through very quickly some of our galleries that are very pertinent to our conversation today. We have 7 galleries, and then we have exhibits within each gallery. And as I hope I don't make anybody dizzy, I'll take my time scrolling here. Our galleries, as you could imagine, follow that trajectory of African descendant peoples out of Africa and West Africa and across the continent. We don't start that story, of course, with enslavement. We talk about those histories prior to enslavement. And then we get into the Atlantic world and that transatlantic experience. We do indeed address issues of enslavement and Jim Crow. As you can imagine, as a historian, I make sure we spend some time with Reconstruction. We also get into the stories associated with Black liberation movements. And what we want to do today very quickly is offer some camaraderie and some connection with you folks and highlight one particular special exhibit that speaks to the themes of tonight's conversation, and that indeed is picturing Black history in Milwaukee and beyond. And one of the ways that we look to show that connection with you all folks is to highlight some of the rich ways that images and photographs help to tell some stories out of our city. We want to highlight one of our key partners, the Wisconsin Historical Society, in reference to your work and your images there with Freedom Summer. The Wisconsin Historical Society has the largest collection of materials and documents that helped to document Freedom Summer. In fact, we had a young historian in the 1960s who was engaged in Freedom Summer and said, hey, we need to get all of these documents, or as many of them as we possibly can, because this is indeed a historic moment. And so we have a rich collection at the Wisconsin Historical Society that helps to document and collect that moment in 1964, Freedom Summer. But what I'd like to do is just take a few minutes here and walk us into a couple of these images, these exhibits that really help to chronicle the histories of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I'll start here with the March on Milwaukee. Milwaukee, Wisconsin in 1967 was home to, in fact, is Maya there? I think Maya is there with you. Our student griot, Maya Mays, she indeed wrote the script here for this exhibit. The open housing marches in 1967 and 68 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, helped to shape federal policy around fair housing later in 1968. The marchers marched for over 200 nights to demand fair housing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The NAACP Youth Council was very central in leading those marches. They worked with the Honorable Vel Phillips, a local elected official, as well as Father James Groppe, in challenging unfair practices and residential segregation in the city. But it was the young people who really shaped that movement. And you see Father Groppe there. And what we like to do is, when we are sharing these histories about the open housing marches here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we use images to tell those stories. We, in particular, work with a number of educators around the city, and we want to make sure that young people in this city know how significant their voices were in the 1960s, specifically in their local communities, that then reverberates and plays a significant role in reshaping fair housing across the entire country. And one of the ways we do so, as you could imagine, is we get into these images. We ask the young people and adults as well to really interrogate and think through what's happening in these images, the ages of these young people as they're shaping important protests in the city, confrontations between activists and law enforcement in the city. This is one of my favorite images here. This image captures so much intensity. It captures so much of the moment with the stance, the pride, the concern, the fear of these young men, and then the ensuing aggression of law enforcement here. It also gives us an opportunity to again think through who are the folks that were taking part in these marches and how young they were. And then also the role that law enforcement had to play in protecting the marchers. And so it helps us complicate some of those narratives as well. And we get to see here, again, the Honorable Vel Phillips, the only African-American on the Common Council and only woman on the Common Council, and the ways in which she engaged the battle for fair housing legislatively in our local government. It also gives us an opportunity to think through what it means when young people work with their elders, and when protest communities work with legislators locally to demand changes in the legislative and political landscape in a particular environment. And after the assassination of Dr. King, Milwaukee, Wisconsin was home to one of the largest protests and recognitions of the significance of Dr. King there in 1968. And these images help to tell those stories as well. And here is one more image that highlights again the ways in which our young people were central to that movement, and how their elders indeed followed their lead in helping to shape that movement. And this story is also interesting because you have a Catholic priest, a white Catholic priest who was very much connected to the young people in the NAACP. We also have the portions of this story that highlight the NAACP's group of folks who were a little bit older. They referred to themselves as the Commandos. They protected the young people. These folks had, some of them had gone off to Vietnam and were veterans, and some of them had themselves been a part of the NAACP Youth Council. Some of them were early to mid 20s, and so there was a community of folks who helped to protect these young people from the ensuing violence that they would meet. And so, as part of our efforts to tell these local histories and share these local histories, we indeed want images to be central in that process. And we also partnered with the Haggerty Museum of Art on Marquette's campus. We have a art museum on our campus, and so ABHM and Haggerty partnered to tell the story and share the story of Bill Tennyson, a local photographer who really captured the essence of Milwaukee history over several decades. Want to shout out Mia Pfeiffer, who works with us. She couldn't make it this evening, but she's indeed central to the work we do over at America's Black Holocaust Museum. And everything from Juneteenth celebrations to the ways in which sports and other activities are central to Milwaukee's history. The collection from Bill Tennyson, Dynamic Range, was the title of that exhibit. This collection really brings to life key moments in Milwaukee's rich history. You have here Dr. Cameron in conversation with Joe William Trotter. Dr. Trotter wrote the significant work that helped to chronicle Milwaukee's Black migration and movement of folks, or prior to the significant population explosion of African American Southerners in coming to Milwaukee. Joe William Trotter writes Black Milwaukee to highlight the way that industry and the engagement of African Americans in industry was setting the table for that growth of the Black population. And here he's in conversation with Dr. Cameron. This story here of Ernest Lacy, who was killed by the police. You see early on in the 1980s, movements of Milwaukeeans who are demanding justice for Ernest Lacy and his family. This is a significant moment in Milwaukee history. Dr. Cameron wrote about this particular development as well. You just see that Bill Tennyson was central in capturing these really iconic moments in Milwaukee's history. And so much of what we want to do at America's Black Holocaust Museum is indeed share those rich stories about African descended people, dig into those stories about the experiences of African Americans, and always make sure that we are highlighting the ways in which local history can come alive and be a part of our present. And these images help to tell that story. And we really appreciate you folks giving us a chance to be in conversation and in partnership with you today. And thank you for putting on this event.